Radio Free 102.3 KJLH. Good morning, family. Whew. Busy day around here, and I'm so pleased to let you know we have two authors on our phone this morning. The book is Stamped, Racism, Anti-Racism, and You. It's a remix of the national award-winning Stamped from the Beginning. And joining us, the authors of that book, New York Times best-selling author, two-time National Book Award finalist, recipient of the Newbery Honor, and many, many more such honors. Jason Reynolds is joining us. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Good morning.
Welcome to the front page. And also on the line with you, another New York Times bestselling author, award-winning historian, professor of history and international relations, and founding director of the Anti-Racist Research and Policy Center at American University, Ibram X. Kendi. Good morning, Dr. Kendi.
Good morning.
Welcome to the front page. So, a lot of our listeners here on the show are experts on anti-racism in their own right. A lot of change makers and activists that listen. But you guys are teaming up to bring this message to a different audience.
Right. I mean, for sure. I mean, ultimately, I think, Dr. Kennedy's idea, it was to make sure that we could also make this accessible to young people, right? So that we could actually be propagating anti-racism, like bringing them up out of the soil and growing them into anti-racist, so that by the time they're our age, this is sort of a natural and normal conversation and a natural and normal process to push against assimilationism and segregationism.
I mean,
Yes,
please.
No, I was just going to say, I think many of us have come to our anti-racist activism not only from our experiences, but books, critically important books that we've read. And many of us don't read those books until college, until after we leave high school, until we're later in age. And so we were like, what if we have middle schoolers and high schoolers already sort of reading what we're reading when we're older?
It seems timely. I mean, I feel like in some ways, young people often lead us in terms of their activism, just because they have their own way of doing things. And I'm thinking of, the Fight for 15. I'm thinking of Black Lives Matter. I'm thinking of, even the fight for safe spaces on campuses. A lot of times this stuff comes up organically, but like you said, finding our way as we go. So how do you see your book fitting into all of these, these movements and these energies that are going on with young people now?
I think there's always been a guiding doctrine. You look at any sort of major movement, there's always been a guiding doctrine or several guiding doctrines. I think that the one thing that is different is that this particular piece of literature is written with them in mind. It's written by people who know that they're on the front lines, who know that they're the ones who are shaping and molding our culture and our world, and saying this is not a thing that we want to use to lead you. It's a thing that we want to use, that we want to give you as a buttress, so that you can truly go out into the world armed and prepared and protected, and to enable you to actually get the job done.
And Dr. Kendi, I think, talking about doctrines, I mean, one of the things I like is that you really train people how to not be racist and train people how to train others.
And I think because in many ways we have to be trained, because in many ways we're trained to be racist in this society. Black people are trained to believe there's something wrong with black people. White people are trained to believe that racial disparities, whether it's in the disparities between who's dying right now as a result of COVID-19 or disparities in wealth, are because there's something inferior about poor people of color. We're trained to be racist, and we're also trained to believe we're not racist, that we can't be racist. And so we, in a sense, have to train ourselves to be something different, and we have to have that guiding sort of principles. And so that's what we tried to lay down for young people in this book, training them on how to be anti-racist.
And I guess some of us still need, like you said, we still need to train ourselves. So maybe as we're working with young people, we can also either refresh ourselves or take ourselves a step further. Because what I find, I'm thinking right now, sometimes when I listen to lawmakers, I'm not going to name any names at the moment, I hear a dated philosophy about racism or anti-racism, something that would have been really progressive back in 1960 something, but today seems very stilted and not applicable.
I think that's the see, and I'm so glad you brought this up, because I really believe that is the crux that drives a lot of this work. I think that everything has to evolve, right? And over time, we've seen things change. We've seen the language change. We've seen culture change. But if the language and culture doesn't continue to shift, then the circumstances of said culture doesn't shift. And so I'm like, I really, my whole life is about making sure that young people can continue to push the line, right? I don't want to live in a world where young people are not irreverent, where young people aren't shaking the table, where young people aren't building new vocabulary, right? Like, it's as annoying as it may be to the adults, it should be, right? That because the change that they're pushing forward should feel a little uncomfortable, because if it's uncomfortable, then it probably means that it's necessary. And so that's our whole mission for sure.
Yeah, as a mom of a teenager, what you just said definitely resonates. I'm going to have to remind myself, dude, they're going to do it their way, and you're not supposed to like it. You're the mom right now. Dr. Kendi, you want to talk about that? I mean, just in terms of how do we make sure that we are up to date, and that we were having a conversation on this show yesterday about, race around COVID, and some people, talking about the impulses towards Asian folks at this moment. And I felt like I was talking with some folks from, the civil unrest of April 1992, where some attitudes or ideas haven't changed since then, and we're still reacting based on experiences that we've had in the past without updating our understanding of, race, culture, white supremacy, classism, and all the things that play into this equation.
Well, I remember the first time I sat down with Jason and we publicly spoke about this book, and one of the things he encouraged, it was obvious, it was a crowd of adults, and he encouraged them to read this book themselves, to ensure that they can have conversations with their young people about STEM. And, you're absolutely correct. You have people of color thinking other people of color are the problem. You also have many different races thinking that the reason why black people are being infected and killed at higher rates is because black people are not taking the virus seriously, because black people are not socially distancing. That was the sort of narrative until this past weekend. We saw all over this country white people protesting and obviously, wanting to defy stay-at-home orders. Now suddenly, black people are not being blamed, and people are now beginning to realize that it was a series of racist policies and racism that's behind our higher death and infection rates.
Right, plus the fact that we have all those jobs, right? The restaurant workers, the gig worker, drivers and all that stuff is mostly us, the people that are nurses, doctors. A lot of us are out there. This is a great point. Jason Reynolds, I'm looking at your work, and you mostly have done fiction, and, even, written for younger people before with the middle grade track series, written, Miles Morales, Spider-Man, and Look Both Ways. But this is a different kind of project. Why did you want to do this, and how did both of those skill sets come together in this case?
Oh, I didn't want to do this. Just say I try to, Dr. Kendi and I, we've been talking about this for a long time. I like to be honest as possible about that. This was not something that I ever wanted to do. I think, look, I have, I respect the people who are great, and Dr. Kendi's great. He asked me after we met at the National Book Award a couple years back, and he asked me shortly after if I would do this, and I said no, and he asked again, and I said no, and he asked again, and eventually I said yes, and the reason I said no is because I have been writing fiction for so long, and because I respect people who are great so at work. Now, over time, that became more about like, well, look, I respect him so much that maybe I should go ahead and trust that he sees whatever he sees in me. So let me give it a go. In terms of how the fiction bleeds into this, I think my greatest gift as a fiction writer is voice, tone, and pace, right? It's like I know for a fact that I can, once I settle in, that I can tap the vein of young America. Because I know them and I know what it is. I know what they need. I know what I needed when I was that age. And so once I trusted myself and got back to my own intuition, it's no different than when I was writing a novel, except I can't make things up because it's real.
And Dr. Kendi, I mean, this is really building on, your work. I mean, and expanding, I guess, to a younger crowd, even though, I know a lot of young people are aware of your work that wasn't specifically targeting them. How did you sort of bend your skills or your, body of work to make this pop?
Well, that was all the genius of Jason. I did not feel that I had those skills, and which is why I felt I needed to work with someone who could essentially, who knows, who can tap the vein of young America. And I think, one of the things about history books is history books generally are just not written in a way that young people are going to want to consume. And so I think with Jason, one of the first things he did was, he wrote, "This is not a history book," right? And I think for him, if he can sort of talk about this, it not only sort of freed him, but it also freed the reader, the young reader, to say, okay, this isn't like all those other boring history books that I'm being forced to read, that I'm not going to remember, that aren't relevant to my life. This is different. This is going to be meaningful. This is going to be funny and serious. I'm going to learn something from this, and I can't wait to read this.
Yeah,
well,
I really.
Go ahead.
It's one of those weird things where young people, all of us, at some point in our lives, we like subversion, right? And so for me, it was like, all right, I read when I was in school. I wasn't that great of a student because textbooks never felt like they were being written with me in mind, right? Especially the ones that had to do with history. And so the first thing I needed to do was tell them at least, assure them that this was not that kind of book. This was not going to be your school textbook. This was not going to be a textbook. This was not going to be a history book in the way that they think about it. Because who wants to read that when you're 14 years old?
Yeah, no doubt. And I think, it's interesting that you would say, Dr. Kendi, you know what, I need someone who has this vibe. I feel like a lot of us, as we get grown, we get selective amnesia, like where we can only remember the good and, obedient things we did as children, and this tendency to say, oh, young people today are going to hell in a handbasket. Like, I think every generation does that because we forget all the crazy stuff we did. And, if my kid did the things I did when I was young, I'd probably lock him up. But so there has to be some magic in being able to remember that and put it on the page in a way, that consistently does speak to young people.
Yeah. I'm 36 years old, but I don't have children. I don't have a partner. And so I still feel 16 most of the time. And I think I sort of live in that space where I just do whatever I want to do. And there are moments where I'm still irresponsible and all that kind of stuff still exists. I still dress like them. I got all the tattoos, all the things, because that's just who I am. It's who I've always been. And so because of that, I think I have a bit of a cheat code when it comes to the mind of teenager.
It's so irresponsible that you're busy writing best-selling books, New York Times best-selling books and National Book Awards finalists. Yeah, that doesn't take any discipline at all. But no, I know what you're saying. Is some of it is a mindset. Like for me, I do have a kid and I have a job where I get up really early, but there's something in my mind that just always stays in that, vibe of being, a little wild, which kids pick up on. And, it's one of the reasons they like hanging out with my son at our house.
That's awesome.
No, but and it's even important for even activists who are in their 30s or 40s or 50s or even, in their 60s and 70s, active civil rights activists who are now, retiring in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. There was a time, some of them are extremely wild still, right, in a good way. and there was a time in which they were confronting this country in the way young people are confronting this country. And those of us who are historians and we study that period, they don't really like us that much because we can tell them about that time in which they were doing precisely what they're saying some young people should do. Now they're saying, oh, well, I learned not to do it, but no. But
but how did you learn?
You transformed this country. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, well, my dad, my father is a Mary Baraka, a.k.a. Leroy Jones, and he always kept that vibe, too. I know kids always loved him, too, because he always had that little wild side to him, even in his 70s. And I think you're right. If we could tap into that, maybe we could learn not to be so judgmental, and we could learn to appreciate the activism and the style of confrontation that young people are doing now.
I met your father when I was 16 years old, and he was a big influence on my life. And I actually was with him quite a bit throughout my late teens and early 20s. And maybe when the show is over, I'll tell you a very funny thing, a wild thing that he tried to get me to do.
I'm trying to tell you. I can't wait to hear it. Dr. Kendi, go ahead.
I'll tell you, it was one of these things where we were hanging out. I was like 19. He's like, hey, man, we're at Penn State University, I think. He's like, hey, come on, man, let's get out of here. Let's go get a drink. And I'm like, well, Mr. Baraka, I'm 19 years old. And he's like, it's fine. He's like, it's fine. He was, but that's a whole other story. Your father was one of my heroes. I have photographs with him, and that was my guy. So, but definitely a wild old man. It was amazing.
Well, I mean, because I think there's something to be said for holding on to that irreverence and that, that attitude that got us to question authority in the first place.
Yeah, for sure.
Dr. Kendi, I mean, I know this is basic, and we're talking about, your new book, which is geared toward the younger crowd. It's a YA nonfiction piece, stamped. But if you could just sort of talk a little bit about your philosophies around anti-racism, and just in terms of, as you said, we can read this book and update ourselves, and then perhaps communicate better amongst ourselves and with the next generation of activism.
Yeah, I mean, very quickly, as we sort of show in this book for young people, and of course I do in my other work, really there are anti-racist ideas, and these are ideas that suggest there's nothing superior or inferior, wrong or right, better or worse about any racial group, that we're literally equal. And as a result of our equality, if there's disparities and inequities, it must be the result of racist policy and power. And that's what we should be focused on. And then you have other ideas, racist ideas, basically that have been stating that, no, the reason why we have these inequities is because there's something wrong with black people. And so we need to either segregate black people, as segregationists would say, or as a hater, as we call them, and Stamps would say, oh, we need to civilize black people, as an assimilationist would say, or as a liker would say, as we describe in Stamps. And so what we encourage young people to do is be more like an anti-racist, more like a lover, more somebody who's going to appreciate the equality of all, despite all of our differences, and recognize that the fundamental racial problem is not people, but power and policy.
Because being neutral or being colorblind is not enough.
No, it's not enough, and I actually don't even know whether it even exists. And so, there's racial hierarchy,
right,
and there's racial equality. Right? There's racial injustice, and there's racial justice. There's no in between that. There's no neutrality between that.
The book is Stamped: Racism, Anti-Racism, and You, a remix of the National Book Award-winning Stamped from the Beginning. It is out now. You can get it. You can read it yourself and then give it to your young person, the young person in your life, or maybe get two. Get one for you and one for the young person in your life, folks. On under stay-at-home orders as we are here in California, something to read, something to do, something to spark some conversation, which of course is one of the best things we can do right now. It's 5:29 in the morning. I know that you guys have to go. Jason Reynolds and Ibram X. Kendi, what would you leave us with this morning?
For me, I think the only thing I'd like to leave you all with, specifically the young people, is that you are loved. I think we don't say it enough, and I think one of the biggest parts about pushing young people forward is knowing, the biggest battery you could put in their back is to tell them that they're loved and to show them that they're loved. And this book is nothing more; it's a love letter to them.
And I would say to young people, particularly young people of color, that embrace the imperfections of yourself and even of your people. And what I mean by that is what makes each and every one of us human, what makes black people as a group human, is our imperfections. To be human is to be imperfect. And so, we should not be striving to be perfect in order to demonstrate to another race that we're human. We are human in and of ourselves.
All right. Well, thank you both so much for joining us today. And I encourage everyone to go out, not go out, stay in and get the book. We'll have it linked up on our website. You can have someone bring it to you. Stamped: Racism, Anti-Racism, and You. Thank you guys both so very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
5:31 in the morning. When we get back, we're going to talk some politics. I know we've been talking a lot of COVID. Well, there is an intersection, and we will get to that when we get back. It's the front page. Total Talk Expression Radio Free 102.3 KJLH.